So today I would like to talk to you guys about the progressives. We're in the progressive era. We've talked about the key concepts that go along with the progressive era in this unit that we are in. We're going to talk about some progressive reforms, the idea of muckrakers, who some muckrakers were, and then also some progressive presidents. So today, in 2020, you hear a lot of conversations about progressives, right? And when people talk about progressives now, they're talking about people like Bernie Sanders. They're talking about people like maybe even Elizabeth Warren or AOC in Congress. That is not what we are talking about here. So try really hard to divorce our understanding right now in our contemporary day of what a progressive is from who progressives were when we're talking about the progressive era in the early 1900s. Okay, so let's start with what progressives want. If there's one word that you can think of to remind yourself of what progressives want, I would say it's efficiencies. They want to see society run efficiently, government run efficiently. They want to put processes and plans in place that will make government more efficient, that will make business more efficient. We referenced that a little bit when we were talking about things like the Model T and the assembly line. Technologies are making us more efficient. So this is translating those efficiencies into and these ideas of human progress into government at various levels. So they want political reform. Again, they want to make politics more efficient, the political process more efficient. In order to do that, you have to reform it. So that's the other thing we're going to be talking about, our reform. So political reform, they want government regulations that will end up helping consumers. They want women's suffrage. Women's suffrage is the right to vote at the federal level for women. They want meat packing standards, so food and safety standards. They want facilities that do things like meat packing to have to follow certain regulations set forth by the federal government that are standardized across the country, across the industry. They want to reduce the income gap between the rich and the poor. They want an honest government. They want to bust trusts, monopolies. They think that big business is bad for competition. It makes things less efficient. The bigger a business is, the less competition there is. So let's bust those trusts. And again, that goes back to one of the first things that we said, helping consumers. It would drive down costs if there's more competition. Social welfare laws to help children, so maybe even things like child labor laws. And solutions to harsh working and living conditions. Again, we've talked about those tenement houses, for examples. So are addressing efficiencies the key to reform? Progressives believe in progress, that society is capable of improvement, and that continued growth and advancement is not just important, but it's inevitable, that we are going to progress. That's why they are the progressives. Okay, so one category of individual that we need to talk about in the progressive era are muckrakers. Muckrakers are journalists, so think about investigative reporters who publicized and exposed social, economic, and political injustice. And I've put on a chart for you some of the most important muckrakers for us to know, what they wrote and what their area of focus was. So Ida Tarbell. She's going to write the history of the Standard Oil Company. She's focusing on exposing corruption and other things related to trusts. This is Ida Tarbell, and one quote that we should always associate with her is from her text, The History of Standard Oil. If it has taught us anything, it is that our present lawmakers as a body are ignorant, corrupt, and unprincipled, that the majority of them are directly or indirectly under the control of the very monopolies against whose acts we have been seeking relief. It's really fascinating, I think, to read these quotes that I'm going to be putting up for each one of these muckrakers and think about how much you think that they still apply today. So the next muckraker is Helen Hunt Jackson. There she is, looking all sassy in her braids. She writes a book called A Century of Dishonor, where she writes about the treatment of Native Americans. She says, if I could write a story that would do for the Indian 100th part of what Uncle Tom's Cabin did for the Negro, I would be thankful the rest of my life. Jacob Riis, and we're going to look at some of his photos separately, published a book called How the Other Half Lives. And in his book, How the Other Half Lives, he focuses on exposing the conditions that people are living in tenements in New York City. There is a little bit of controversy around Jacob Riis and some of the other muckrakers. His book was a book of photographs, of course, with captions and explanations. But he doesn't ask permission for his subjects. And in some situations, he would open the door to a tenement home, take a picture, and move on. And so there's some conversation about exploitation of the people in the tenements. But he does expose the conditions because people didn't know how they lived. Again, the title of the book, How the Other Half Lives. And his quote is, "Oh God, that bread should be so dear and flesh and blood so cheap." Upton Sinclair, he writes The Jungle, in which he exposes the conditions of meat packing plants. He says one of the necessary accompaniments of capitalism in a democracy is political corruption. And from his book, I've got a second quote of his, prepare yourself because it's gross. He says they use everything about the hog except the squeal. Okay, Lincoln Steffens writes The Shame of the Cities, in which he exposes the corruption of city government. He says, care like hell. Sit around the bars and drink and pose and pretend all you want to, but in reality, deep down underneath, care like hell. Ida B. Wells, she is a Memphian. We have talked about her before. She writes Southern Horrors, Lynch Laws in All Its Phases, in addition to publishing her newspaper. She exposes the abuses, civil rights abuses of Jim Crow and also the railroads. And she says the way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them. A lot of times when we're talking about reform, especially if we're going to talk about political reform, we don't see in the progressive era, we don't see the federal government tackling reform first. What we see often and early in the progressive era is local reforms. So governors in certain states instituting reforms, the restructuring of municipal governments to include civil servants, not just the spoils system. The best example of a progressive reformer at the local level is somebody you guys need to know. He's the governor of Wisconsin, a man named Robert La Follette. And by the way, Wisconsin is almost always on the forefront of progressive reforms. And I know that that's unusual, but they usually sort of do things first. They're known for being very independent. If you look at their election history, they're usually kind of in a toss-up area. They're known for electing independents to state offices, sending independents to Congress. So, who knew Wisconsin was so progressive? But they're known as the most progressive state in a lot of respects in this time period, in large part because of their governor. For example, under his leadership, railroads and utilities are going to be regulated, and they have to pay higher income taxes. Laws are passed that are related to workmen's comp. So if you get hurt on the job, you are entitled to compensation and paid time off. Graduated taxes on inherited money. You used to not have to pay any kind of estate tax at all, but now you have to pay taxes on any money that you inherit. And public education. He makes improvements to public education. Reformers really believe that state legislatures, though, are too controlled by party bosses to be efficient. So in a lot of states, you'll see that progressives are going to look for ways to go around state legislatures directly to the people. So in the spirit of that, this is the governor of Wisconsin. Oh, I forgot I did this. He says, quote, America is not made, but is in the making. Mere passive citizenship is not enough. Men must be aggressive for what is right if government is to be saved from those who are aggressive for what is wrong. People ask me this, I've seen this question asked every once in a while, and sometimes students will ask me, who's our most influential American political figure who was never president? You could definitely say Henry Clay, maybe even John C. Calhoun, Stephen Douglas, Frederick Douglass. I would also even maybe put Robert La Follette on here because he is incredibly influential and important. He toys with running for president, but he never does. Okay, so here are some things that laws that progressives get passed that go around state legislatures to take things directly to the people. So if you've ever heard of initiative, referendum, and recall. In an initiative, new legislation, so new laws, are submitted directly to the voters, and they'll decide on them in a general election at the ballot box. Do I want this? Yes. Do I want this? No. A referendum provides a method by which actions of the legislature could be up to the electorate for approval. The electorate may uphold or reverse the legislature's decision. So Congress passed this law at the state level. The state legislature passed this law. Do you approve of it, yes or no? And then recall. You can vote to remove a public official from public office during a special election, which could be called after a sufficient and significant number of signatures have been gathered through a petition. Now, not every state has all three of these. For example, in Tennessee, you can't recall a governor, but you can recall like local elected officials like the mayor or an alderman. In order to do it, though, like it's a very high bar to get a recall, and all it does is put it on the ballot. Do you want to kick them out of office, or do you not want to kick them out of office? You could recall an alderman here, but you would have to get half. So if you look at the state election, half of the people who voted here for governor would have to sign the petition. It would be really hard to do, but you could do it. They did recently, and by recently, I mean in the last 10, 15 years, that I can remember, there has been a governor recalled in California and also a governor recalled in Wisconsin. Oh, and primary elections. It removes the choice of political candidate from the party bosses and gives it to the people. Now, this is huge. You guys don't vote yet, but I vote, and I vote in primaries. So different states have different rules about closed or open primaries. In Tennessee, I get to go in and tell them whichever primary I want to vote in. Do I want to vote in a Republican primary, or do I want to vote in a Democratic primary? I can only pick one, right? You can't vote in both here. You can vote in both anywhere. But I get to choose help to choose who that party's candidate is going to be. They didn't used to do that. So if we had that now, Biden and Harris and Sanders and Warren and Buttigieg, they all would have gone into their DNC, headquarters, and the DNC would have chosen which one of them got it. But today the people choose, and it's because of this progressive era reform. Go back here before I play this video. One of the turning point events in terms of workplace safety in the United States and workplace conditions is the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. It happens in the early 1900s. It says 1911. That a fire breaks out at this garment factory where almost exclusively immigrant women are working. Many people are killed. Until 9/11, I think it says this in the video too, it's the worst workplace catastrophe in U.S. history. So after the Shirtwaist Factory fire, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, you will start to see a state commission formed that will later issue a series of workplace safety recommendations. Things like fire escapes will be something that comes out of this commission. I just want to play a short little video about it.
The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire was a man-made disaster, a tragedy of the industrial age, made all the worse because it could have been prevented. Let me set the scene. New York City, early 20th century. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory occupied several floors of a Manhattan business building called the Ash Building. It was located just off Washington Square Park, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was, by almost any definition, a sweatshop. It was a densely packed place. Some 500 people worked there, and the work schedule was punishing. 11 to 12 hours a day, every day. Most of the people employed at the factory were young immigrant women, teenagers even, who didn't speak English. These women sat at long tables, day in, day out, sewing shirtwaists. Shirtwaists were mass-produced blouses. They resembled men's shirts and were very popular with working women. So here's what happened. March 25th, 1911, Saturday evening, the end of the workday, the work week. A fire started in a bin of cotton scraps, perhaps from a cigarette butt. A manager tried to use a hose to put it out, but the hose valve was rusted shut, and the hose itself was rotted away. The factory floor didn't have a sprinkler system, so the fire spread quickly. People panicked. The building had only one flimsy fire escape, and it wasn't nearly big enough. It collapsed. The building had 4 elevators, but only one was working, and it only held 12 people at a time. It managed to make 4 rescue trips before it broke down. Some desperate workers jumped to their deaths down the elevator shaft. Workers tried to take the stairs, but the exit doors only opened inward, and they were kept locked by factory management. Many people were crushed to death trying to get out. Firefighting technology hadn't caught up to the new tall buildings of a city like New York. The fire hoses and ladders could only reach the 7th floor, 1 floor short of the fire. Dozens of desperate workers jumped out of the windows. They chose to die from the fall instead of the flames. Other workers burned to death or died from smoke inhalation. The whole episode lasted just 18 minutes. 144 people were dead. 2 more died later in the hospital, bringing the death toll to 146. Until the events of September 11th, it was the deadliest workplace disaster in New York City history. Days later, on April 5th, a massive funeral protest march took place on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. More than 350,000 people were in attendance. The factory owners, Max Planck and Isaac Harris, were indicted for manslaughter, but were declared not guilty in their trial later that year. Yet, long after the flames died out, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire served as a cautionary tale that helped to redefine the American industrial workplace. The fire was a key moment in the growth of labor unions, particularly the ILGWU, or International Ladies Garment Workers Union. New York City passed measures including the Sullivan-Hoey Fire Prevention Law, which required sprinkler systems to be installed in all factories. It served as a model for state and national workplace safety codes. These measures made American workers safer, but they were too late for the workers who perished one terrible March day at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory.
Okay, so social Darwinism. Social Darwinism is unfortunately also a reality of the progressive era. It's this idea, and we've mentioned this before, that Darwin's theories should be applied to natural selection, meaning survival of the fittest. So why are some people rich and some people poor? Well, some are just better at capitalism than others, right? It's not something that Charles Darwin wrote about. It's not something that he advocated for, but it's definitely something that is picked up in the United States in this time period and beyond, and it reinforces the ideas of individualism. Herbert Spencer is also going to, with this theory of social Darwinism, apply theories of natural selection to human society, survival of the fittest, and it justifies laissez-faire. So should the government get involved to help poor people? Well, no. It actually might even be in the government's best interest to let nature take its course, get those unfit out of society, and leave room for people who are better at capitalism. We'll also mention my favorite comparison is Ebenezer Scrooge. If they're going to die, then they better do it and decrease the surplus population. Let me see here. Andrew Carnegie and the Gospel of Wealth, which again is something that we have talked about. Yes, so this is a quote from his Gospel of Wealth. So Andrew Carnegie believed, just as a reminder, Andrew Carnegie believed that, yes, he acknowledged social Darwinism. So the Gospel of Wealth is not a repudiation of social Darwinism. But he doesn't go so far as to say, let them all die. He says, those of us who are better suited for this, those of us who are blessed with money, have an obligation to give to others. And so he's really known for his charitable work. And from his writing, The Gospel of Wealth, he says, this then is held to be the duty of the man of wealth. First, to set an example of modest, unostentatious living, shunning display or extravagance, to provide moderately for the legitimate wants of those dependent upon him, and after doing so, to consider all surplus revenues which come to him simply as trust funds, which he is called upon to administer, and strictly bound as a matter of duty to administer in the manner which, in his judgment, is best calculated to produce the most beneficial results for the community. The man of wealth thus becoming the mere agent and trustee for his poor brethren, bringing to their service his superior wisdom, experience, and ability to administer, doing for them better than they would or could do for themselves. So yes, he's incredibly generous, but he also doesn't think that they can figure it out on their own. So we don't give the poor, more money. We don't give them government aid, but it should be incumbent upon the wealthy in society to do something about it. I want you to think about this idea of, were the problems of the Gilded Age inevitable, or could they have been avoided? Let's see here. Other things that are going to pop up during the Gilded Age. There will be people who say, look, this is wrong. Social Darwinism is wrong. We're different from animals because we can make plans for the future and we have the ability to change outcomes. A man named Edward Bellamy writes a text called Looking Backward, in which he advocates for socialism. We also see naturalism pop up in literature. Authors like Jack London write books about how sometimes it's not us that create our circumstances, but rather sometimes our circumstances are beyond our control. We also see organizations like the YMCA and the Salvation Army, both religious organizations established to help others. Individuals like Jane Addams step up to help. She is involved in the settlement house movement. The image on the bottom left is a picture of the Hull House in Chicago. It is a house that she founds where she takes in immigrants and their children and sort of watches them and educates the kids while the women go work at a job or apply for jobs, teaching them English, etc. Public education also sees a boost during this time period because there is a need for two things: to train a new workforce and to Americanize new immigrants. People in the cities tended to have greater access to public education, and African Americans as a whole tended to be denied access. The social gospel is also going to come into popularity during this time period, essentially saying, this is Walter Rausch. No, that's Jane Addams. It's not Walter. That's Jane Addams. She founded Hull House. That's an image from inside Hull House, the immigrant kids. This is Walter Rauschenberg. He's going to say, if you're a Christian, then you reform. If you're a Christian, you don't leave people in poverty. You don't allow people to live in tenement squalor, right? That there has to be something done. Okay, I'm going to pause here and we're going to pick up talking about women in a second.